Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master, and in this one, we're going to be talking about Wonder Woman, G.I. Joe, Terminator, and just all sorts of stuff. But before we get into that, smash like, make sure you're subscribed, and leave us a comment. That helps us out with the YouTube algorithm, but also we love hearing from you guys. We have an awesome community here, and that's thanks to you. So thank you so much for being here. So, oftentimes, as a game master, what I do is I just take an idea and throw it against the wall and see what sticks. And sometimes my players love it, sometimes they hate it, and sometimes you get this kind of in between thing where they love it in really small doses, but then they want it to be over now, right? And I feel like that was very much the case with last month's adventures. The majority of my players liked the majority of the adventures, but there was also a lot of players coming to me between game sessions saying they were kind of ready for that to be over with. They wanted to kind of close the book on that chapter of the game. So a lot of those stories that we were doing was the Joes woke up in stasis and found out that Cobra had infiltrated the government. That was one of those stories. I did a thing where there were Terminators had been sent back to the 80s, and then when Terminator 2 happened the way it did in the movie, those other T-800s were trying to get things back on track, so they'd kind of joined the military and gone up through the ranks, and they were building a Skynet because they wanted that dark future to happen. Um, and at any rate, then people were ready for it to be over. So I decided that this adventure would kind of be like me cleaning house a little and resolving those plot threads. So the way we did it was with mostly Wonder Woman focused on Cobra agents and Cobra synthoids, and Superman analogs focused on the robots, whether they were Terminators or Cobra Bats, or we'd actually seen a hybrid of the two. Because my thinking was if both of these bad guy groups are worming their way into the government and are having an effect on government technology, then both of those groups then are going to have access to the resulting technology, right? So in the adventure where we saw the Joes had split up, and then when they all got back together, they met at this abandoned farm. And they got attacked by bats, but those bats had the skin over top of their robot parts. That's what I mean when I say kind of a hybrid of those two technologies, where it's kind of a Cobra Bat, it's kind of a Terminator. Um, and we had said that those guys were dressed like FBI agents. So the Superman analogs, and I guess real quick, I should probably define an analog because I'm sure there's probably some listeners that are unfamiliar with the term. An example of a Superman analog would be like Homelander from The Boys, or Apollo from The Authority. Um, it's where the creator of these characters, they will look at existing archetypes, like say the Justice League, right? And so when who is it that does The Boys? That's Garth Ennis, right? At any rate, the guy who made The Boys clearly looked at the Justice League, and then he took Aquaman and he turned him into the Deep. He took Wonder Woman and turned her into Queen Maeve. He took Superman and turned him into Homelander. And in each case, he twists them so that they are what he wants his story to be about, right? And this has been going on forever, going all the way back to the golden age of comic books. They've been making analogs of Superman or knockoffs of Superman. Especially, I personally have a fondness for the Silver Age, and there's these Silver Age stories where Superboy, who back then was young Superman, right? he would all the time encounter these other guys who were basically him, right? But analogs. And so DC often was doing this because they thought that he needed peers, like they wanted him to have friends that were at his level. So they would have these characters like Hyperboy or whoever, um, that often they were from some planet that got destroyed and they got sent in a rocket or whatever to a different planet other than Earth. And, that planet would have a name like Oceania or something like that. And more often than not, they were very Earth like. And then those other Superboys um, were on these planets. And then because they can fly through space, often Superboy could go visit his friend on, Oceania or whatever. Um, and I'm not, don't quote me on the names there because I don't have it in front of me. I need a list, to get it right. But I'm just trying to convey that basic gist. Hopefully it's understandable. But so as a big Superman fan, reading this stuff over the years, where my mind always went is like, well, where's this guy now? Right? Like to me, this is a super interesting phenomenon, no pun intended. Um, and so we have done a lot of cameos over the years of these various guys, and we said, yeah, they were sort of a Superboy or an Ultra Boy or a Hyperboy or whatever back when Superboy was Superboy, right? Way back when in the 20th century. So they would be adults now. And not all, but most of them would have the same powers as pre-crisis Superman. And so when we would do some huge disaster on Earth, like Onslaught or Days of Future Past or whatever, that didn't affect these other planets. And so I was like, yeah, let's do stuff with these characters. So I've done quite a bit with that over the years. And so we did some of that in this adventure where I told everybody to pick a Superman analog. And I just had them going around and it was, super easy, barely an inconvenience. But they went around and they were just like melting down Terminators with heat vision. And they were melting down Cobra Bats. And you know what I mean? The point was not so much to challenge the players. This was a game I ran between the main game sessions just to clean house, you know? So the players liked that. My family members liked that because, like I said, they wanted to kind of be done with a lot of that stuff. And so then that's more or less the prologue. The main body of the thing then focused on Wonder Woman because whereas I kind of had the Superman analogs going after the guys that were not human, so they could use X-ray vision and pretty quickly tell who's who, right? So that was like the easy part. The part that was intended as the challenge of this adventure then was my wife played Wonder Woman, and she was using the lasso of truth. And this spawned an interesting conversation out of game. And I've talked before on the channel about how I think there are dangers when we deconstruct superheroes. Um, I don't want to spend a ton of time on it in this adventure because that's not what this video is really about. But little kids need role models. Oftentimes those are superheroes because we see, I mean, go to Walmart. I mean, clearly kids are targeted. Like right now, there's a Captain America movie in the theaters, so there are end caps everywhere in my Walmart with Captain America toys and t-shirts and, tennis shoes for like kindergartners and so on and so forth, right? Um, and this summer, I'm sure it's going to be Fantastic Four and Superman stuff everywhere catered to kids. So it's really, really important for them to have role models that are like very, very moral. So I'm not talking about like I mentioned earlier, the boys and Homelander and stuff like that. I'm not talking about Homelander because he's not marketed to kids. right? But if you're gonna market it to kids, we actually need more characters that are what fanboys whine about when they call them two-dimensional. People say that like it's bad, but the characters with no flaws, right, are usually it is a way that society takes its values and passes them on to the next generation without seeming preachy. That's what old shows like Super Friends were. So comics have gotten away from that over the years. Comics have gotten very well. I mean, you know what happened was Watchmen, and Alan Moore, who did Watchmen, regrets Watchmen. He said it in interviews. Back in the 90s, he did a comic book series where it was called Supreme. Rob Liefeld made the character. Um, Ironically, I think the character was kind of a deconstruction early on, but then Alan Moore came along. They passed it on to him. I want to say it was still Image Comics back then. I'm not sure. But at any rate, he picked up that ball and ran with it, and he actually made some of the greatest Superman stories ever, even though he wasn't using Superman to do it, right? And they were really, really good. And his Supreme was like very, very moral and wholesome, you know? Um, and Alan Moore himself said that was kind of an apology because he thought that Watchmen was going to be this thing kind of off to the side, an island unto itself. And it wasn't. Everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people saw it as the goal, right? Or like, oh man, look how much money that made. We should absolutely have the Super Friends killing people, right? And if you said that back when Watchmen came out, people would think you were a lunatic. But fast forward to the death of Ted Kord, Wonder Woman snapping the neck of Maxwell Lord, so on and so forth. We are drowning in that crap now, right? So for a lot of people that grew up on the dark age of comics that we're in at the moment, um, when I mentioned Wonder Woman's Lasso of Truth, minds started to leap to conclusions and be like, oh, well, so Wonder Woman is a tyrant and she's forcing her whatever on these poor people and blah blah blah. You got to go back to the how the character was originally intended, right? The creator of Wonder Woman, I always struggle to remember his name, William Moulton Marston, aka I think Charles Moulton was his, I want to say his pen name. I don't have it in front of me, so bear with me, but that guy invented the lie detector. He thought he was making the world a better place. He thought he was, revolutionizing things. Um, and we could have a legit conversation about how reliable a lie detector is in real life, but that's kind of not the point, right? Because the lasso of truth doesn't work like that. The lasso is infallible. The lasso always works. The lasso is an absolute. What I put forth to everybody in a much more Super Friends kind of a context is, well, hold on, think about it though. Wonder Woman has been an American institution since Pearl Harbor. She's saved the world more times than you can count, right? She's been a hero before almost everybody was even born, right? People would have such faith in her, I think. They would think that she always does the right thing. The general public would have no reason to think otherwise, right? I actually think that if she went around and starts lassoing politicians and basically saying, hey, are you a Cobra Synthoid? I think, there's how the players are going to react to it, but I think the actual general public, the NPCs of Earth K, would be very cool with this. So that's how I played it. That was not how the players kind of were thinking about it. And I understand why, but like I say, I think that people would trust her. So we had her doing that. We have her going around doing that. And so some of them are synthoids. And under the right circumstances, these old men that have been politicians since the 80s, since Cobra 1, they just melt on like live TV, which is, I could see that being a bit of a horror movie. But at any rate, but then sometimes she's lassoing people, and it turns out this is just like Major Blood or whatever. Like he's not a synthoid. You know what I mean? Um, so I thought that was interesting, and it's one of those things where normally I would kind of like to unpack that a little bit, stretch it out. For instance, I'm sure that Cobra, if they've been running the show for 40 years, they probably have propaganda, and they're probably going to use that on the general public to try to change how people think, right? What was the phrase from Vietnam? Winning hearts and minds. Um, yeah. So normally I would do more with it. And I've noticed in the comments section, by the way, a lot of the guys will leave me a message and say they do kind of think this should be a little harder, this should take longer, whatever. And I totally get where you're coming from there, by the way. Um, but the balance here is it's about ending unpopular plots with the players, right? So I had this kind of going a little easier than maybe it should have, going a little faster than maybe it should have, because again, I'm just trying to get through it. But at any rate, during the course of all this, then she runs into Badra. And I'd actually never heard of Badra before, or if I did, I forgot her because God knows I'm forgetful with my brain tumor. But Badra, spelled Badra, right? Also known as Meteor Girl, um, was a villain. And her first appearance was Comic Cavalcade number 25 back in February of 1948. And she's a Superman analog, a female one, obviously, but she's a Superman analog. Instead of coming from the planet Krypton, she comes from a planet called Hator, Hator. Um, a war there destroyed that planet. She came to Earth in a lead rich meteorite, and she was doing stuff in Washington, D.C. all the way back then. And we'd never mentioned her in our role playing game ever. So I thought that's kind of cool. I didn't know about her. Let's do a game with her. And she seemed right up my alley because first of all, we're already doing stuff with Superman analogs in my game, right? Because I wanted the X-ray vision to figure out who the robots were so they could melt those down. We're doing a thing with people infiltrating the government. That was Badra's deal. Um, I just thought it was a really good fit for this adventure. So Wonder Woman encounters Badra, and they fight. And of course, we rolled it out with dice. And actually, because of the stats, and I know a lot of people are going to argue this, but because of the stats from first edition DC Heroes, check it out yourself if you don't believe me. But like Superman has a strength of 50, Wonder Woman has a strength of 40. No, 45. Sorry, she has a strength 45. Again, it's not in front of me. I'm going by memory. And then Superman has a body of 40, but Wonder Woman only has like a body of 16, I want to say. She has to use the bracers to block incoming attacks, and that's kind of hard for her to do in the DC Heroes game mechanics. So actually, if you have Wonder Woman fight a Kryptonian, or in this case, an analog of a Kryptonian, the Kryptonian's pretty much going to win every time, right? So that was the case here. Badra won and got away. Um, so we're going to do more with Badra later. I was happy with this. On the one hand, she can't go back to work because the heroes will find her, right? And even though she got the drop on Wonder Woman, who'd been going around lassoing people, um, Wonder Woman was kind of surprised by what she found there. Um, the heroes still kind of win, even in defeat, because Badra can't just show up to work on Monday and keep doing what she's been doing. And then, of course, she's mad about that, and we'll see her in later games. But yeah, this was the first game I ever ran with Badra. I had no idea she existed until now. I'm going to be doing some more stuff with Superman analogs here very soon. Um, I wanted to say something else. I saw where Grant Morrison, and I've mentioned before on the podcast, I'm not a Grant Morrison fan. If you are, more power to you. That's fine. I'm never going to tell anybody else what they should or should not like, right? Um, he's done a lot of stuff that I just am not into it. I think he's a dark guy, and so he did that where he took one of those Superman analogs, and I guess they appeared in an issue of Green Lantern not too awful long ago, and he made one of them, I want to say, a serial killer or something. I don't like that. I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but I very seriously think I'm going to do a lot of vilifying them. I think I'm probably going to run them more the way they were originally intended to be when they were created in the Silver Age. A lot of them, by the way, seem to be made by Mort Weisinger, and I like that guy. He seemed like he was a good dude from what I've heard. Um, at the very least, he made a bunch of stuff I like, so I would rather honor him than uh, you know, kind of ruin his creations. But yeah, that was it for this one. Um, the key takeaways are sort of the Terminators are defeated. This was some cleanup that we had not accomplished in the other Terminator game. Cobra, a lot of the Cobra guys are on the run right now. They're no longer in positions of power, so now Cobra can go back to uh, some more classic Cobra plots instead of this sort of thing. Um, yeah, and nature is healing, as the meme goes. Hopefully, you guys got a kick out of this one. We did on our end. Um, if you'd like to support our modest little channel, we would love it. If you hit like, make sure you're subscribed because YouTube loves to unsubscribe you and not tell you. And leave us a comment. And from all of us here at the longest running superhero role playing game on earth, we hope you have a good one, and we'll see you in the next adventure. Bye.